Happy Monday, Justin.
Hey, Zach.
Oh, you look. That's not the Grand Canyon, is it? Is that the Grand Canyon behind you?
Oh, it's a lithium mine, or maybe a cobalt mine, one or the other.
Happy Monday. We had big news break over the weekend. The U.S. Senate finally passed the what the heck's it called? The Inflation Reduction Repairing Inflation Act of whatever the hell you want to call it. It contains the updates to EV tax credits that we thought were going to be long gone just a few weeks ago. Justin, what is the breaking news from over this weekend? Something tells me we've got an action-packed 30 minutes here.
Yeah, so within these 755 page text, there's about 30 pages dedicated to the EV tax credit revisions. So much to dig into. Before we get started, I want to say that it's a mixed bag of good and bad news. I do think that what we're going to dive into today will be great news in the long term for electrification of the automotive industry, even for the automakers themselves, and especially for the American consumer. However, and I gotta really emphasize this, the next 1 to 2, maybe even 3 years, some say all the way to 2028, these next years will be difficult and full of honestly confusion for car buyers when it comes to which EVs qualify for the tax credit, when do they qualify, do they qualify for a percentage of it or the full tax credit. We're going to get into all of these ifs and buts and just weird regulations built into this revised tax credit.
And we should mention the link in the top of the description is our ongoing, and Justin, kudos to you, continues to update guide to the EV tax credit. So after today's show, if you want to check back there later this evening, tomorrow, Justin, thank you. You'll be updating that. And as a friendly reminder to those of you who listen to the podcast, just go to joinyaa.com/EV, the letter E and the letter V. That'll take you right there to the updated guide on tax credits. But let's jump into it, Justin. Why don't we start with the positives? What are the positives so far that you've been able to decipher from the approved bill from the Senate?
Honestly, number one positive from my perspective is that used electric vehicles are now going to qualify for $4,000 in rebates or tax credits. That's big. I know so much of this depends on how the dealers are going to treat their vehicle pricing in the years to come, but that's huge. Used EVs are going to qualify for $4,000 in tax credits or rebates, depending on what you choose. And then the second most positive aspect of this proposed bill, which is almost becoming law, it's been passed by the Senate, is that it's bringing more jobs to America. And honestly, that's going to be a crucial part of the clean energy economy that we're trying to build around the world, is bringing more jobs domestically.
Two positives, two good positives. I pulled it up on the screen there just for a second. If you have questions that you want answered about the tax credits, please put them in the chat, because we are going to be, and I say we, but kudos again go to you, Justin. Justin, you'll be doing the research to help compile and update back on the Join YAA website. Plus, you might even know some of the answers here live on the show, be able to answer them for folks. What are the negatives? What are the things that you think? We got the two positives. What are the negatives? And that's, not a good start. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, the negatives. Well, I gotta say, we've already got 42 people joining us. So if you're just joining us right now, we're just getting started. So bear with us because there's a lot to talk about, but we're gonna dive into it in just 25 minutes time. Okay. So we said the good things were that the used EVs now qualify for a $4,000 tax credit, and it's going to bring a lot more EV related jobs to America. That's great. What about the negatives, the downsides? Where do I start? Okay. Most EVs on sale right now in the United States are going to lose their eligibility for the tax credit for a period of time. Why is that? We'll dig into it, but the short summary of it is that it's all going to be dependent on where batteries are manufactured, where the minerals in the batteries come from, and where final assembly happens. So, for example, 5 months ago, I purchased a Hyundai Ioniq 5. Love it very much. But once this bill is signed into law, and it looks like it will be signed into law, that EV is going to lose eligibility. That's one of many. We'll talk about that. Let's see some other negatives. The confusion. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
this is going to fall on the shoulders of the dealers to start sending in certifications to, I forget which government agency it is, but dealers and automakers are going to have to basically join a program where they keep track of VIN numbers, keep track of I mean, and then consumers are going to have to keep track of their purchases because of like a transition provision. Oh, Zach, we just got to dive into it. I mean, there's so much to talk about. It's wild.
Yeah, it really does sound wild. All right, why don't we jump to a couple of the questions that have come through in the chat? And let's also mention, Justin, so far in the research you've done, no one has compiled the list yet of vehicles that actually qualify for the updated tax credits. That's going to be a project that we dig into as well. And let's answer this question from Mark. How does this impact? How did the new proposed law that will likely become law this week, how does it impact people who already purchased an electric vehicle?
Yeah, if you purchased in 2022, you're fine because you're going to be able to take advantage of the existing EV tax credit. That is up to $7,500, not a rebate, it's not refundable, but up to your tax liability. So I purchased in April, I'll still be able to claim the tax credit that currently exists. And also, there is a transition provision, might as well mention it right now because it relates to purchasing in 2022. If you get a signed purchase order in 2022 and take delivery in 2023, let's say after the new bill is passed, you can still get the original tax credit. So if you want an Ioniq 5, go get that signed purchase order. Make sure it's like an actual purchase order, not just a text message from a dealership salesman saying, yeah, we got the car. You can still get that tax credit. But oh, that's one of the many things that are in this bill that's just kind of iffy.
Yeah, so there's actually that's super interesting. So you're telling me that there's like a very small window here where the prior, not well, it's the current set of EV tax incentives would apply to certain vehicles that post approval or post approval of this new bill will no longer. And so if I get a signed buyer's order, let's say between like now and Wednesday, I could be okay to get that refund versus I don't know, Thursday after the bill's passed, I would no longer be able to.
No, you can still get the signed purchase order anytime in 2022.
Okay, gotcha.
So
Gotcha,
that's good
gotcha.
news.
Okay.
That's some good news. But still, there's going to be even more demand for the EVs that we've seen already experiencing demand through the roof before this news hit.
Wow. 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 Okay, so
Yeah,
there's like
scramble.
lots of complexity in here that as you start to unearth it, obviously impacts decision making today, next year, etc.
Yes, and I read the bill 2 times. I read the EV portions of the bill 2 times this morning, and to just give it my best effort to be able to help out everyone with their questions. Because honestly, after reading it 2 times, I would say I gained a lot of clarity. I would not recommend it on anyone. I would not wish it upon anyone to have to read that text 2 times. But there are even a few questions that we still have after reading it 2 times. So just keep tossing the questions my way, Zach.
What about partial, or excuse me, PHEVs? Will they still qualify for the full $7,500 rebate?
They're not mentioned anywhere in the text. And here's what kind of
Really?
surprised me, and I feel like they might have needed an EV consultant like myself as a part of writing this bill, because they don't even mention a minimum battery capacity, which is typically how this is done. PHEVs like the Prius Prime, the
Yep.
RAV4 Prime, Chrysler
Yep.
Pacifica plug-in hybrid, they have battery capacities between 7 kilowatt hours and about 14 kilowatt hours. Nowhere in this text, and I double checked, nowhere in there does it say a minimum battery capacity. It just has language, which language matters in legislation, language that says plug-in electric vehicle. And from everything I've seen, and I did Google and see what other journalists were saying, and it really looks like plug-in hybrids are going to lose it as soon as this is signed. Yeah, so that's where it
That's
stands
kind
right
of
now.
devastating. That honestly, that because I've everyone that's watched the show, or me and my dad over on other channels, we think plug-in hybrids are essentially the pathway towards electric vehicles, and quite
You know,
frankly, make a
I
lot more
agree.
sense because they're cheaper. Well, can be cheaper, and also provide a hell of a lot of benefits in terms of range and whatnot, cost savings. Wow, they're gonna miss out on tax incentives. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
So I pulled it up just because I think this is worth mentioning. The way the text defined clean vehicles is hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, which we don't even have time to get into that because there's like one on the market, but it has greater
Yep.
implications for the commercial vehicle sector. And then qualified plug-in electric drive motor vehicles. That's what they said. Qualified plug-in electric drive motor. No mention of plug-in hybrids and no mention of minimum battery capacity. So it looks like they're losing the credit.
Wow. Let's pull up James's comment here. This bill will hurt way more than help. Practically all cars will not qualify. And I know, like we said at the outset here, no one has compiled yet the list of what does and does not qualify. I'm sure, like yourself, Justin, there are people out there who will be working on that. But what's your take on this? Is that the truth, that most vehicles, like you said it actually at the outset, like most vehicles for the foreseeable future won't qualify, but then eventually will?
I'm looking at the long game here. This is going to be tough and complicated for the average car buyer for 2022 through 2024, maybe longer. And automakers, they're freaking out. I mean, I looked at some of the statements, the joint statements released by, I mean, GM, Toyota, a few others. They're saying, look, this we see this bill has good intentions, but they're not going to be able to just quickly establish battery infrastructure, battery production infrastructure domestically in the United States. That takes like a decade. So, why do I think this is going to be good in the long run? Because it is going to lower our dependence on often unstable and sometimes controversial international supply chains, such as the infamous cobalt mines in Congo. Who knows what goes on in China? Honestly, right now, China is the number one source of many battery minerals, and this is going to really, really disincentivize accessing Chinese raw materials because honestly, the bill has built into it a list of foreign entities of concern. And if you get battery minerals from a foreign entity of concern, you're not going to be able to qualify for the tax credit at all. And that's just one of the many
Wow.
complexities built into it. But in the long run, I think it's going to build a strong domestic supply chain with a lot of job building going on, job growth in America. Everything from mining to battery production to vehicle final assembly. That is where I see the light at the end of the tunnel. But the downside is that from this year to at least 2024, very few EVs are going to qualify. That's a fact. And today, maybe tomorrow at the latest, I'm going to publish a resource showing which EVs will continue to qualify and which don't.
So let me make sure I understand, because I haven't read the bill yet, and I'm here live with everyone else trying to learn from you, Justin. Help me understand. Does a vehicle truly have to have all of its components, the battery production, and the final assembly here in the United States for it to qualify for these revised EV tax credits?
So, from the time of signing, which technically the bill says as soon as the secretary releases final guidance, which is going to be very quickly after the bill is signed into law, it's going to be a 40% requirement for battery minerals to be sourced either from the United States or a country that the United States has a free trade agreement with. Let me just go over the ones that actually have battery infrastructure and battery production. Canada, Mexico, Chile. Chile has a lot of battery mining, battery mineral mining. Korea. I don't really know what mines they got going on there, but Australia has a lot of battery mineral mining. Those are the countries that would qualify based on the battery mineral requirement. But wow, Zach, as you can see, like I'm gonna have to start digging into, where does Volkswagen get their battery minerals from? Tesla, I'm not even sure where Tesla gets theirs from. I know that they produce batteries here in the United States for the Model Y. I saw one of our viewers, Learning Fast, in the chat pointing out that, yeah, the Tesla Model Y has batteries made in the US. But honestly, Learning Fast, I've got to see where do they source their minerals, because that is a huge part of it. Now, Zach, I know I'm ranting, but I got to go on a little bit further because I think I need to clarify something for the viewers. All right. Right now, as it stands, the existing tax credit that has existed since 2008, it's $7,500. That's it, right? Well, the new one is going to be divided into two halves, 3750, 3750. Half of it is based on where the battery minerals are sourced from. The other half is based on where the battery is manufactured, the battery component.
Okay.
As you can see, the tax credit has gone from being an EV tax credit to literally being a battery infrastructure credit. Like it's 100% based on battery infrastructure when it comes to the financial aspect of this credit. Now, the third requirement, I mean, I'm running out of words here for all these nuances, is that it must be having final assembly in the United States, Mexico, or Canada. For the final assembly portion, it literally says North America. Last time I checked, that's Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Whew. Wild, Zach. Wild.
Wow, so many like hyper specific pieces. And you're right, this is no longer an EV tax credit. This is a was your battery
Yes.
produced in North America or with a country that we do trade with credit.
They did a good job of making this overly complicated, but I still feel that it's going to be good in the long run. It's just going to take a decade for the United States to really reap the benefits of this bill because we will have a strong domestic supply chain, less reliant on international, you know, geopolitics for one thing. But I think it's going to be good in the long run, but it's going to be messy for consumers for the next few years.
I mean, energy independence pre-EV has always been a challenge in the United States, and the idea that we have to get oil from other countries and battery materials from other countries, minerals from other countries. So I understand why it's framed in this way. It does make beg the question, however, will this actually stunt EV growth in the short term? Which if it does, actually could be a good thing because, quite frankly, the infrastructure, as we've talked about on this show, is not there. Infrastructure, both in terms of charging, but also the raw materials and the battery production. It's not quite there. It's also very expensive right now. I guess I'm curious on your take, Justin. Do you think this actually slows down some of the EV adoption for a period of time before it picks back up more significantly?
Let's talk about the unknowns. So here's how I see it. The current quarter, are we in Q3 2022, Zach? Time
We are
doesn't
in
exist. We're
Q3.
in
Yep.
Q3. I believe we're going to see increased EV adoption this quarter as everyone scrambles to buy the EV they want, and especially in Q4. Mad dash to buy the Kia EV6, the Hyundai Ioniq 5. Even the model, well, the Model 3 never doesn't qualify anyways. So let me think. Volvo XC40, C40, Polestar, Polestar 2,
Yep.
a whole bunch of EVs that will lose the credit but currently qualify. There's going to be a mad dash, and I think we're going to see EV market share spike. Right now, it's been about 5.5% in the United States. I think we're going to see it spike above 7% by Q4 of this year. That would be a huge spike. And then here's what it depends on, Zach. It depends on how automakers who are losing the credit, in theory, it's going to be temporarily losing the credit. It's going to depend on how they set their pricing for 2023. We've seen General Motors cut back the MSRP of the Chevy Bolt by $6,000 because it no longer receives the federal tax credit.
Mm-hmm.
They reached their 200,000 sale cap. If we start to see Hyundai, Kia, Polestar, um, the others start to cut back their prices somehow, I don't know if they can afford to do that, to try to entice buyers to stay laser focused on their EVs. Maybe EV sales will stay strong, but I do think there's a possibility that market share slips a little bit next year.
Let's talk a little bit about the cap and threshold because you mentioned, for example, Tesla, and they no longer qualify for the existing, or what I'll start to call the incumbent tax credits. Is the 200,000 vehicle threshold, is that lifted in this next round of tax incentives?
It's out the door completely. With the new revised
Oh, wow.
proposal, it is instead having an expiration date of 2032. So you'd have 10 years of incentives. Yep, that's good news. I would say that's in the good news category, but oh man.
I'm like processing it right now because we've always operated under this 200,000 vehicles sold, which seemed kind of arbitrary and strange. So, but it was also like a bit of an incentive to make people early adopters and get them, using electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids and etc. 10 years. Wow, that seems like an awfully long time, which I guess then makes sense for the massive amount of infrastructure and domestic supply chains that need to be developed. What about income restrictions? Are there still income restrictions on these tax credits?
Yes, there are more strict income restrictions. So let me
Okay.
go over the numbers real quick. I've got this pulled up for you guys. All right. Get your wallets out. We're going to look at these income restrictions. For the new EV tax credit, we'll talk about the different used EV income restrictions in a moment. For the new EVs, individual filers must have an adjusted gross income of 150,000 or less, joint filers 300,000 or less, and head of household 225. If you're looking at the used EV tax credit, which is up to $4,000, but no more than 30% of the value of the vehicle, you have income restrictions of 75,000 for individual filers, 112 for head of household, and $150,000 for joint filers. Now, one other thing I got to mention, because this is probably the last time we're going to have time to talk about the used EV tax credit today, is that the vehicle must be at least 2 years old and it must cost under $25,000. Now, that right there, Zach, is going to limit severely the usability of the used EV tax credit, because we've seen Ioniq 5s on the market with like 5,000 miles on the odometer for $65,000.
I mean, I know my dad's not here, but
Really? You gotta be kidding me.
Under 25
$25,000.
grand, man? Are you serious? Do they like see what's going on in the market?
I don't know, Zach. I don't know.
And is that
because-
for 10 years? 10 years under 25 grand? That's craziness.
Yeah, this is all for 10 years. Yes.
Okay, so let's just be very clear. The used EV tax credit won't work. Or maybe, okay, here you go. Justice hit the nail on the head. Bolt or maybe a Leaf. Like,
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, maybe like a Hyundai Kona electric with 100,000 miles on the odometer.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Now,
wait, what about vehicle prices? Because that's, I think, another component of this as well. Like some
Yes.
vehicles, obviously, because they're so expensive, there's no incentive
oh
against
yes,
them, right?
yes. So much to talk about. Thank you for keeping us on track, Zach. Vehicle
I'm
price
just trying to
limit.
learn.
This isn't quite so negative in my perspective. It's just all right. Now, vans, SUVs, and trucks MSRP cap is 80,000. Justice and I were chatting the other day, and we think that, well, I thought that the MSRP cap should be about 100,000 because of how many of these trucks are so expensive. And I mean, anyways, electric sedans up to 55,000. So that's not the end of the world, but it could have been, 20,000 higher.
I'm also trying to wonder, like, what qualifies as a sedan versus what qualifies as an SUV. There's so much kind of crossover happening in the space. I'm kind of curious what qualifies for both.
Yes. Yeah, I'd have to look into that too. But another thing that's worth mentioning is that the battery component and battery mineral requirements, they're going to increase from 2024 onward. So it's only going to get more difficult for automakers to meet the required threshold. In 2024, and well, starting now through 2023, it's a minimum of 40% battery mineral sourcing from the countries we mentioned before, but then it increases 10% each year until it reaches 80% in 2028. So it's automakers are kind of freaking out right now. They're realizing that their goals of being 100% electric by 2035, those goals are kind of in jeopardy now, considering, for General Motors, how big of a market the United States is. Yeah, there's a lot to think about if you're an automotive executive right now.
Do you think that this is also going to, unfortunately, make EVs even more expensive? Because sourcing materials, producing things here in the United States is, I mean, the reason corporations do these things globally isn't because it's more expensive, it's because it's cheaper. Will this ultimately end up driving up the cost of electric vehicles? And then is our government, which is, hey, us, we fund it, are we then subsidizing this transition to EV? I mean, obviously we are if there's tax credits.
We are.
But
yeah, we are.
it's like the two play with each other, like prices go up because things are produced in the United States. Great, producing jobs and whatnot. But then like we're essentially just paying for this path to electrification.
Yeah. I mean, Zach, I've thought about this, but I don't really know. I don't know. No easy answer here. We'll see what happens. One thing that's worth noting is that the price limits for the vehicles that we just talked about, that is all based on MSRP. It does say that in the bill, MSRP. There's no mention of dealer markups there's no mention at all of trying to restrict dealer markups. So you could end up buying like a F-150 Lightning that's supposed to be $57,000. But in reality, it's like $90,000 because the dealer marked it up, and then at least you get the tax credit, is what they tell you.
This is fascinating. This I actually think is going to lead to even more gamesmanship around MSRPs and the further undermining of the legitimacy of manufacturer suggested retail price. Because if anything, we've seen that MSRPs no longer matter for new cars. I mean, they really, really don't. And quite frankly, because used car values have gone up so high, who cares about what the original MSRP was? No one seems to care. I think this is going to further undermine automakers actually setting realistic MSRPs on vehicles, because the dealers will simply mark things up. And quite frankly, there's probably a quid pro quo type relationship between the dealer and the OEM. Like, there's enough money to go around that they all end up okay. What you just described with the F-150 Lightning is a perfect example. Let's keep things under thresholds, sell it with a, as my father would say, poop ton of markup, and we all win. That's concerning, honestly, that they're not taking into consideration the actual transaction price, but instead just focusing on the manufacturer's suggested, emphasis on suggested retail price.
Yeah, and I know Justice is with us in the chat. I gotta say, Justice, I've thought about this, and I really think this is going to end up being good news for Tesla, because out of every automaker currently building EVs or working on electrification, Tesla is by far the closest to being able to meet these requirements. We know that Tesla builds batteries in California. They're starting to build batteries at Giga Austin. We just need to make sure they source their battery minerals from one of the countries we mentioned before. They are very close to being able to satisfy these requirements. All they would have to do is drop their prices by a tad. I mean, if inflation does not continue to run away from us, Tesla may be able to retain its dominance in the EV market because of this incentive. That's fascinating to think about, Zach.
I want to hit on Mike's question here, and then I want to end with, for today's show at least, winners and losers. And again, if you know anyone who's thinking about an EV, if you've got friends who you talk to about EVs, join yaa.com/EV. That's kind of your one-stop shop that Justin's keeping updated about all this news. But from Mike here, anything union related for the
No,
EV
that
tax
was completely
credits?
dropped.
Good. Just wanted to address that. Winners and losers, Justin. Is your winner Tesla or your losers Hyundai Kia?
Yes, basically. Also, winners would be anyone who like owns land that might have lithium under it in the United States. I know there's a lot of that in New Mexico, even Western North Carolina, in my neck of the woods. Yeah, a lot of money going into lithium right now. But Zach, I want to wrap up the show with a bit of advice for anyone out there who's thinking about purchasing an EV soon, or might be freaking out because of this revision. If you've got your eyes on an EV that is probably going to lose the credit. So we know the Ioniq 5 EV6. We'll get a list out for you at joinyaa.com. Check us out. We've got the blog. I will post a list, and I'll drop it in the comments soon. But anyways, if you're thinking about an EV that's going to lose the credit, you should seriously consider buying it ASAP. You will receive the original EV tax credit from 2008 to 2022 if you buy that vehicle now or get a signed purchase order in 2022. That could end up saving you up to $7,500. Keep that in mind. And yeah, check the comments pretty soon for a link to which EVs will qualify and which won't.
And please post your questions in the comments back on the community forum as well. I think we'll be talking about this. I don't think we will be talking about this all week, especially as I think even more confusion likely surfaces as these tax credits go into effect later this week, most likely. Justin, thanks for being on top of it. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. We'll be back on Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. here on the East Coast. And please, please, please go to that URL. It's such a great resource that you've put together for all of us, Justin, myself included.
Yeah, big update coming here in a few minutes. Thank you so much, Zach.
See you, Justin. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.